Busy old fool, unruly son, why dost thou thus, through windows and through curtains, call on us? Welcome to Troubadour Podcast, and this is Metaphysical Monday. Today, I'm going to be reading The Sun Rising by John Donne. Now, we've been exploring a lot of John Donne. We have gone under and done The Undertaking. We have covered Woman's Constancy and Go and Catch a Falling Star and The Good Morrow and, of course, The Flea. And now we are covering The Sun Rising. Now, one of the reasons that I chose John Donne and metaphysical poetry is because, along with the metaphysical poets and the cavalry poets, this was the context, or one big context, one part of the world in which the romantics were coming out of. So this, our magazine is really focused on the romantics. But in order to understand the romantics, it's helpful to understand the great poetry and the great literature that came before and after. What elements of romanticism were in it? Romanticism is primarily a historical movement of the 19th century, and that's what we mean. But there are elements that go into today that we still see some elements of romanticism, their impact. And if we want to bring back some of those elements, we need to really understand the context. And the metaphysical poets, particularly John Donne, is a really good example of the differences between romanticism and metaphysical poetry and cavalry poetry and things that happened before. Now, in John Donne and the metaphysical poets, what we're exploring are the kind of metaphors and the what was called far-fetched metaphors or far-fetched imagery and witty conceits. And the way it's been contemporarily, that contemporary critics have discussed it, the metaphysical poets, is that they were dealing with the kind of emotion into an intellectual emotion. So it's not an emotion that is absorbed in you. It's more like a dissection of the emotion, more abstractly, more intellectually, thinking about analyzing it and maybe poking it to death. And we're going to see a little bit of this where there is an emotion. It's an emotional scene. What we're looking at, what's going on is very poignant and powerful for the person, but it's expressed in terminology and in a way that is analytical. So in fact, John Donne, like many of his readers, were educated lawyers. They were very familiar with law and in a certain type of argumentation. And he does this often, and we'll see this here, where he's kind of building an argument, like a case. He's basically building a certain kind of case. Now, this is a complicated poem. It's only 3 stanzas. It's a complicated poem because the words are very complex and there's a lot of really tight, weird imagery. And some of the imagery is kind of complicated. I think it's vague, even what he's talking about. I mean, some people have their hypotheses, but I think it's somewhat intended to be a kind of vague association, and you'll see what I mean. So we're going to, now there are a couple of concepts that I want you to know before we go into this, because one thing, this is a really good poem, I think, to teach if you're also teaching medieval history at all. So if you're teaching like an elementary school or 7th or 8th grade or something, you're teaching medieval history, John Donne, and particularly this poem, may be helpful to explore with your students in that class, because there's 2 concepts from medieval cosmology, not makeup, the study of the stars and the heavenly bodies in a divine sense, and a little bit of astronomy that is helpful to know. So this is, John Donne is contemporary with Galileo. So if you know your astronomy, Copernicus was the first one who really had a mathematical equation that the Earth, or that the sun rotated, the Earth rotated around the sun. So that's the heliocentric, theory of the world. But for the most part, that had not been accepted in England generally. Galileo, of course, famously, went further than Copernicus, proved even more that this theory was correct. And of course, he was imprisoned for this and almost executed. And so he kind of kept his mouth shut. And so John Donne is during the time of Galileo. He is actually born 8 years, I believe, after Galileo, I think in 1572, I believe it is. And so they're very contemporary. So this is happening. I don't know, actually, I'm not an expert on John Donne by any stretch. I don't know his real beliefs, but in here, we're going to get some of the medieval Ptolemaic. So this is the Roman astronomer. We're going to get some of that view. That's the dominant view of the earth-centered view of the world. But it's also combined with religion. And this is really important, is that, what we sometimes don't appreciate is the separation that occurred in this era of humanity between religion and, the doctrines of the church and the beliefs of the church that spread through everybody and every intellectual person. This is how everyone was trained to believe, into something more mathematical, scientific, based on observation and facts alone. And so just two concepts I think you need to know that's will be helpful in some of our discussion of the rising sun is the chain of being philosophy or viewpoint. The chain of being. Now, the chain of being is a viewpoint that I think, to put it in contemporary terms, is why racism made sense. I know that's weird to say, but in this view, racism does make sense. So, it's very important that we get rid of that. We got rid of this view, by the way. But this, just so you understand, in this era, the chain of being is a view that from the rocks all the way up to the prime mover, that's God, the one who puts everything in motion, right? He's the one who controls all motion. He puts everything in motion. He's doing everything with that. He's moving the sun, the star, and the planets. Everything that we can see is the prime mover, God. And from rocks and insects and weeds in the ground and just the worst kind of crawly, creepy, nasty things, that's the bottom of the barrel. Like that's the lees, the gross stuff at the bottom of a barrel of wine or something, right? And that's that scum at the bottom all the way up. There's a chain all the way up, and then of course man is up there. But of course they would, men at this time would very likely, and most of them would dissect man into different races and say that this race is above that race, and maybe they debate or something. But the point is that there was a chain, and you'd probably have something like the white man at the top of that chain. And that was a belief that needed to get rid of course. It's a bad ideology, but that was the ideology. And I think it is helpful here to understand that, because he's going to, in this poem, argue that he and in some situation that he's in is above all of this. He's kind of playing with that chain of being thing, which I think is going out of fashion slowly at this period. Now that we're getting Galileo and Isaac Newton coming. Now, the next concept that you need to understand is a quick little lesson in medieval cosmology. So you have chain of being, right, which is rocks all the way up to sun and the prime mover, and there's a chain, and that means there's a hierarchy. Some are better. Now, related to this is a quick little lesson in cosmology. So at this time, there was a lively debate among intellectuals that this is the prevailing belief, of the old Ptolemaic model of the Earth at the center of the universe. But here's what's important and a little bit different than simply saying the Earth, the geocentric theory of the universe. Everything else in the sky rotated around the Earth in its own sphere. So every planet had its own little, obviously it's a sphere, but it has its own little sphere of influence kind of thing. It's its own little power. And of course, we are the center, so we are the most powerful in a certain sense. But the bigger the sphere, the higher and more important it is in the chain of being, and has control over the smaller spheres. It was also all mixed up with religious beliefs, so that stars and planets were seen as holy, or at least closer to God. Because you look up, it's a literal, you look up and it's, if you think of, oh, look, the heavens are up there, what are you pointing at? You're actually, we know today we're pointing at space, but for them, they were pointing at the heavens, right? And so all these things are related in heaven. So they're closer to God, the prime mover, who set everything into motion. Now, so when you hear a term of the beams of the sun, which is considered a big, powerful body at this period, they were so strong, he's going to be questioning those beams, the sun beam, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that. Okay, so that's a good amount of setup. I hope I didn't lose your interest in that, but I think it's important to get that because the terminology is going to be difficult. There's going to be some, terms that are not normal. So, when he says thine, we've talked about certain terms like that. Thine, remember, is yours. So that's important to remember when he says, if her eyes have not blinded thine. So if her eyes have not blinded you or your eyes. So we'll go through this more and when we analyze it. Let me just let you hear it. And you're not going to understand it very likely. If you do, then, call me and we'll have you start doing this podcast right away because that took me a long time to understand what the heck was going on in this thing. So let's go through this guy. Our first time. The Rising Sun by John Donne. I do have to say, he loved that kind of rhyme with his name. Like he was very egocentric in that way. The Rising Sun by John Donne. Busy old fool, unruly sun, why dost thou thus, through windows and through curtains, call on us? Must to thy motions lovers' seasons run? Saucy pedantic wretch, go chide late schoolboys and sour prentices. Go tell court huntsmen that the king will ride. Call country aunts to harvest offices. Love, all alike, no season knows nor clime, nor hours, days, months, which are the rags of time. Thy beams, so reverend and strong, why shouldst thou think I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink? But that I would not lose her sight so long. If her eyes have not blinded thine, look, and tomorrow late tell me whether both the Indias of spice and mine be where thou left'st them, or lie here with me. Ask for those kings whom thou saw'st yesterday, and thou shalt hear, all here in one bed lay. She is all states and all princes, I. Nothing else is. Princes do but play us. Compared to this, all honors mimic, all wealth alchemy. Thou, son, art half as happy as we, in that the world's contracted thus. Thine age asks ease, and since thy duties be to warm the world, that's done in warming us. Since here to us, and thou art everywhere, this bed thy center is, these walls thy sphere. Whew. Okay. So let's go through this sucker and see what we can come up with. Like I said, this is a complicated poem, but let me give you just a very broad concept of what's going on overall. I think this is one that's really worthwhile, even if it really didn't resonate with you at first. This is one of those ones that it's really going to be worthwhile for you to dig through it. Anybody who enjoys language even a little bit should enjoy the way that Donne uses language here. I mean, this has some really good alliteration with a purpose, not for the sake of alliteration, but alliteration with a purpose. So we're going to talk about, I'll tell you what alliteration is if you're not familiar with it. Now, first, this is a poem that is in the tradition of, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Abads, Aubades. So that's how I'm pronouncing it, as Abads. It's probably Obads or something, I'm not sure. But Aubades. Now, an Abad is a particular kind of poem where two lovers are awakened by the sun that illuminates their illicit activities. And usually the point of the poem is to reveal that they only have a limited amount of time. right? And it kind of stresses the importance of the love that they share together, and that they're going to appreciate. Oh no, it's kind of like, oh no, the sun is here, and we just had this blissful night together of having fun together. I'll leave that to your imagination. And the sun is now waking us up, or even if we stayed up all night, the sun is telling us that it's time to enter the world and leave our affair behind. That's the kind of activity that this is being written in that sense. So that's what's happening to some degree. He says, busy old fool, unruly son, why do you thus? Why dost thou thus? Why do you do this? Through windows and through curtains call on us. Why do you call us, tell us, and this is a particular way of doing a poem where the verb call is all the way at the end of the sentence. So we get what your first reading is, busy old fool, unruly son. Why do you do this? Through windows and through, so do what is the question, right? And who are you calling a busy old fool? Is that me, the reader? Wait, right? And then he says, busy old fool. Oh no, not the reader. It's the unruly son. Okay, so the son is unruly. It's old fool, and we'll talk about that in a second. But then he goes, through windows and through curtains call on us. So it's, the sun, I'm sure you've experienced this, where the sun peeks through the windows and goes through your curtains, and now it's time to get up, and now you have to, gotta hit this alarm and get out of bed and do all that stuff. And he's complaining about that. And then what we're going to learn is that the rest of the poem and is kind of an answer, but it's a particular kind of almost legal argument that he's going to set up with reasoned arguments of why he said, what are you doing this for? Well, we're doing this. And then he's going to invert himself and his lover as the entirety of the world. He's going to say that the world doesn't exist. This is the world. It's the ultimate form of egotism, the selfism, I-ism. It's that everything else doesn't matter. Your whole job is, I'm here in England in this bedroom, this bed right here with me and my lover. This matters. This is the entirety of the world. The rest of the world doesn't matter. Now, it does remind me of a quote from a philosopher who said, I'm not afraid to die because when I die, I won't die. The world will end. And there is, I don't know that this is what Donne is exactly saying here, although I think there's an implication of that, where he's kind of claiming that the world doesn't exist, that, when you've been with a lover in bed, that feeling that is the entirety of the world, the rest of the world drops out, right? Like if you have responsibilities, you forget about those responsibilities. You only think about that moment with your lover. If you have kids, and you might even forget about them, which isn't a good idea to do very often, but that feeling that everything vanishes suddenly, and it's just you and the lover. And that's kind of what he's stressing here, is this idea that, well, why would you do this to us? Right? That's this first little sentence here. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the actual words he's using. So right from the beginning, like a very good lawyer, he is building a case that he's going to cash in on later. So we'll see this when we go into the last stanza, but I want you to see this. This isn't a coincidence. So his first word is busy old, or his first three words are busy old fool. So he's insulting the sun, right? Which is kind of weird in a witty conceit in and of it. It's conceited in its own sense. Busy old fool. So the sun is a fool, but it's also unruly. So it's an old fool. It's also kind of unruly, which is more youthful in its view, right? So or it could be that he's so old that, it's like old men get unruly and they start pinching nurses' bottoms, right? They start getting a little bit antsy and weird and not good, not cool. So busy old fool, unruly son. Why dost thou thus through windows and through curtains call on us? Must to thy motions lovers' seasons run? Now that's a weird sentence. So this I think is one of the primary questions that sets the whole thing in the whole poem and the whole argument in motion itself. Is he's asking, must we, by your motions, the rising and fall setting of the sun, live our lives? Our lovers' seasons run, right? So do we have to really live this way based on your motions, based on you, or is there another way? And he's going to do something very conceited, very, bizarre, which is to say, well, to hell with you, go deal with someone else. He's going to command the sun, right, in his words. Saucy, pedantic wretch. So he calls, not only does he call the sun a busy old fool, he calls it a saucy, pedantic wretch. Now, I can't do this enough on the podcast because it's kind of annoying, but I recommend once in a while pausing the podcast and trying to think what you think this means. Saucy, pedantic wretch, right? So pause for a moment and ask, what does that mean? What is a wretch? What is pedant or pedantic? And what does he mean by saucy? What images come to your mind? What kind of people come to your mind? Now, of course, we could think of a pedantic person as a teacher, and a wretch as not, an old or gross or miserable person, and saucy too, right? So it's like a saucy, always hitting you with zingers or telling you something negative or something like that. So one way that I picture this is just like one of those weird old teachers who constantly berate you, right? They're constantly berating you. And so he's telling this to the sun. The sun is this old teacher that's always berating people. And he says, don't berate me. And we'll find out why he says he's special. Instead, go chide, go scold late schoolboys, right? So that's one person you can go scold. That's somebody you can deal with, is schoolboys, right? And that your job isn't to mess with me and my lover. You saucy pedantic wretch. Instead, go scold schoolboys who are late and sour apprentices. Now, an apprentice, of course, is short for apprentice, and this is somebody who would apprentice for like a blacksmith or something, right? And they would go and learn the blacksmith trade. They'd be like teenagers. You could think of them as interns, but they were more than interns, of course, because they were doing more than just bringing coffee. They were probably doing the dirty work that the blacksmith didn't want to do, but they were doing more hands-on things off it. But they're saying, sour apprentices. Now, why would an apprentice be sour? Well, I mean, this, I think you can relate to interns maybe. Interns will just say, oh, I could do more than this. I'm ready for everything, right? They get sour after a month of doing a little bit of work. So this was true apparently in John Donne's time in the 1500s. Okay, what else does he tell the sun to do? Now, because and keep in mind, he's commanding the sun, which is a witty or a conceited thing to do. It's far-fetched imagery, the idea of a man in his bed with his lover by his arm telling the sun what to do. And he says, well, go tell court huntsman that the king will ride, right? So he's telling, go do something practical. The king's going to go ride, which is hunting. This is, kings often do this. And there's court huntsman that helps the king along. So you need to go tell the court huntsman that today the king's going to ride. So they have to get ready for the king's ride. Call country ants to harvest offices. This is one of the things I had to kind of look up. Call country ants is a reference to peasants. So this is a metaphor for peasants. The peasant is a country ant. And this is one of the reasons why it's more difficult to read someone like John Donne than someone like Wordsworth, because he uses these metaphors that we don't use at all anymore. We don't have peasants, really. We don't actually have peasants at all in the West. And we have farmers, but they're not peasants. There's a difference between a farmer and a peasant. And, so to call peasants country ants makes sense if you know anything about peasants. There is a kind of ant nature to them where they're just rising up and doing exactly what they're supposed to do physically, and then they go to bed and with the dusk, because they didn't have light, because it was before the Industrial Revolution, so most people couldn't afford to have lamps for very long. It was expensive. So call country ants to harvest offices. So harvest offices meant not a cubicle, but like responsibilities. So to do their harvest responsibilities. So go tell the peasants to go do what they're supposed to do, right? You rise with the sun. That's what a peasant's supposed to do. And again, notice it's not him. Donne and his lover, don't tell me nothing. You go tell those people something. And now he's going to talk a little bit about himself or his situation, or the situation of love. Love, all alike, no season knows nor climb. That's climb, not as climbing a mountain, but climate, CLIME, climb like climate or season or what the sun affects. Nor hours, days, months, which are the rags of time. Now that is one hell of a metaphor, rags of time. So he's saying that temporal time, hours, days, months, are rags of time. The real time is eternity, which is like what? Love. It's everything else, right? So it's love all alike, no season knows nor climb. It doesn't know, love doesn't know any of that stuff. It doesn't know anything about seasons or time. Love is eternal. It's above. So all this chain of being I talked about, all the medieval cosmology of the planets, he's making the argument that love is grander and better than that, and his love in particular. So let's move on. Now we're really going to see him earn his title of witty conceits, right? So these are interesting to listen to, witticisms, wisdom, nice phrases that are conceited. So he's going to continue his berating of the sun. Thy beams, your beams, so reverend and strong. Why shouldst thou think? Why do you think you're so strong? Right? Do you really think you're so strong? And the beams is a really good play on words in relation to strong. So usually we can think of beams, sunbeams, right? Because he's talking about to the sun, so we're talking about sunbeams. So we can't think of sunbeams as strong in a certain sense by themselves, right? Like if it's hotter, it might feel like the sunbeams are stronger than if it's cooler. But really, I think what the word strong emphasizes is a relationship, or he's almost making the beams not ephemeral, right? So beams are kind of ephemeral. You can't touch them. Right, you could feel them, but you can't put your hands and grip a beam, except in a cartoon. But he's kind of making it feel like you can, almost like a wood beam. Like that's a beam that you can grip. Right, like this is a strong wood beam. It's a weight-bearing wood beam, and so is this sunbeam. So he's kind of saying, but then he's questioning, why do you think it's so? Why do you think you're so strong? And now this reference to reverence, so reverend and strong. Now this is a clergy church terminology, and this is very important in relation to the idea of medieval cosmology. So the sun is kind of its own powerful entity within the whole sphere of holy medieval viewpoints, as we've seen before. And this is going to be, the sun is basically at the top of the pyramid, the top of the chain, next to the prime mover himself. So why do you think you're so strong though? Because now this is the first two lines here. Now what is he going to do? He's going to challenge it. He's going to insult the sun and claim supremacy. How does he claim supremacy? Because all he has to do to get rid of the sun is to wink. The sun is now gone. Close your eyes, no more sun, right? And this again is the idea of his egotistical, self-centered view of the world, that I am the world and you are just part of my world. I'm the top dog. I'm the top god. Now, I think this is one of the unsung heroes of great alliteration. That's a good example of good alliteration that has a meaning and it gives you an emotional punch. So here are the lines real quick I want to read. Thy beams, so reverend and strong, why shouldst thou think I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink. Now we have two types of alliteration. We have a strong C sound. So alliteration is when you have, combination of similar sounds together of a letter. So, dumb driven cattle, right? Dumb, don't be dumb driven cattle. Right. So that, and even the C, even though it's not a D sound, it has a kind of hardness to it. So don't be dumb driven cattle. Right. So it kind of has that k sound. That's alliteration. So here we have two forms of alliteration. We have strong and a soft, or hard and soft. So we have I could eclipse and cloud them, and then with a wink, with a wink, with a wink. So the with and the wink, that's what we have some alliteration there. And I think it's beautifully done because it starts off strong, right? So he's answering a question that he's posing as a lawyer, right? He's saying, why do you think you're so big and powerful, son? All I got to do is eclipse you. I could eclipse you and cloud you with a wink, right? And it has the feeling of with like how easy it is. So he's starting off strong. I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink, right? I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink. And it has that kind of feel to it. And I think it's really wonderfully done, because using the sounds of language is a most important, or such an important part and overlooked part of poetry. And he does this really well. And this is a very clear, simple example of how a great poet can use alliteration to emphasize his point. So I could eclipse and cloud them with a wink. So the meaning and the sound go together. The harshness of the words of I could eclipse and cloud is in contrast with the simplicity of the solution to blot out the sun with a wink. But that I would not lose her sight so long. Okay, so then the next line after the with a wink is that he wouldn't do that though, or he would not want to do that because then he would lose her sight so long. So this is an interesting little, feels like almost an aside, because he's saying, well, I could do it, but I won't because then I would lose my love for a moment. And if we look at the stanzas so far in this Abad, Aubades, this love poem, set in the morning sun, that the sun is revealing, right? Usually the sun is the powerful entity in those abads. But we haven't really heard much about this woman yet. Actually, not at all. It's more, he says, must to thy motions lovers seasons run, which indicates that this is about lovers, but it's not a love poem. It is, but it's not, he's not, at least not yet, talking about his lover. This is the first time he's really talking about it. It's almost like it's like he wakes up and he's like, gosh darn you, go tell those people this, go tell this, what, you think you're so powerful, and oh baby, yeah, you're the best, this is all about you, I love you, right? But I could close my eyes and block the sun, but then I'd lose sight of you, so I would never do that, darling, right? So he's like coming back to, yeah, there's this woman here, right? And I'm in love with her, and that's what this is all about, is this love for this woman. And this is kind of like John Donne kind of gets lost in his own conceits and his own witticisms. And that's the feeling. And he probably does this on purpose, of course. But that I would not lose her sight so long. Now he's going to talk about her a little bit. If her eyes have not blinded thine, right? So this is a good metaphor. A sun is bright and can blind you if you look at it. And he's comparing her, he's saying, if her beauty is so bright, she could blind the sun, right? And that's not a horrible line to say. I mean, it's definitely unique. One thing I always tell people is like, go to poetry for unique things to say to your woman. And women, you can do this for your man too, of course. And the reason to do that is because it gets boring as hell to just say, oh, you look beautiful. Like, yes, of course that's true, but it's definitely nice to be able to mix it up and to tell her, man, you're so beautiful, the sun would be blinded by you. Like, that's a way better thing to say, I think, occasionally. Okay. If her eyes have not blinded thine. Okay, now he's going to, again, tell the sun what to do. So he's commanding the sun some more. Look. Right, he's saying, go look. And tomorrow late, tell me whether both the Indias of spice and mine be where thou leftst them, or lie here with me. Now, India is a spice. We're talking about East and West India, basically the Indian continent. So look, if you're not blinded by my woman's beauty, go look, and late tomorrow come to me and tell me, do those continents really exist? Does the world really exist? Or are they here lying with me? And he's claiming that the world doesn't exist, only what's in his bed, him and his lover, and of course everything that encompasses, the sex and the pillow talk and the fun and the playing around, all whatever. But that the two of them, they are the world. The Indian continent and the rest of the world doesn't exist. And he chose India's of spice and mine. It's for language purposes, it sounds nice, where both the Indies, those represent all the world. But it's important that I think it's spice, right? He's trying to train your mind in a certain way to think in terms of spiciness and, the exotic nature of the rest of the world versus what's here in his bed with him. Ask for those kings whom thou sawest yesterday, and thou shalt hear, all here in one bed lay. As a great poet, he likes to use all the senses. So we've been getting visions. Look at the continents and spices, and they're gone. They're with me. And hear, right? And you will hear if you ask around where the kings are. You'll see, where you saw them yesterday. You're going to hear that they're all in my bed, not physically, all having sex with each other, but in my bed, in terms of represent, like we are the world. So there are no kings. There's just the two of us. Okay, third stanza. Okay, now we have the argument coming to a close in the last stanza. So remember, he's been building this kind of argument. In this first one, he's setting it up like, he's telling the sun what to do, but he's also telling it that there is, like the chain of being, there's a hierarchy. Go tell the other people, like at the bottom of the hierarchy are lost schoolboys and apprentices. Then up it is court huntsmen and kings that will ride. And then, we have ants and harvest who are harvesting offices. But I'm at the top of all this. Why am I at the top of all this? Because I'm in love and it's me and my lover. And I'm more powerful than you, Mr. Top of the Chain. Because all I have to do to get rid of you is to blind you or to blot you out with a wink. But I wouldn't, because my lover's even more powerful. We are powerful together because she can blind you. And if you think that there is a world, my God, you don't know what you're talking about. Just go look around, and you're not going to find out that all the kings and all the people you thought existed, they're actually here in this bed. We are the world. And he's going to continue this argument. He's making an argument in poetic fashion. She's all states and all princes I. Nothing else is. Now, so she's all states. Hopefully he doesn't mean this in terms of her weight. Hopefully she doesn't weigh as much as the countries, but more that she is as powerful, as important or more. And all the countries have contracted into her. She represents all of them. And of course, he's a man. This is somewhat chauvinistic. I get that. And it is. He's saying that she represents the states and he is the prince, the ruling body. So, of course, there's an implication, even at his time, that the prince conquers the geography. She's the geography. He's the prince, the ruling body. So it's his duty to conquer her. And that's what they've been doing in bed, is the prince has been conquering the states, right? Like that. Talk about that as a way to talk to your lady. Hey, baby, I'm the prince. Can I conquer your states? I don't think that would work. And then of course, nothing else is, or excuse me, nothing else is the next line. So she's all states and all princes next line, nothing else is. So, he's saying that nothing else exists. He's continuing that phrase that he's already proven that, right? He's just re-emphasizing it. He's a good lawyer. Princes do but play us. Princes are nothing, right? They're just hoaxes. They're shysters, fakers. They just play us. And compared to this, all honors mimic. All right, honor is just mimicry. It's fake. It's just one person mimicking another person like parrots. People are just like posturing and faking. And honor as a thing and a way of living is a ridiculous thing. And all wealth, the accumulation and the owning of wealth, of gold and big houses, that's all alchemy. It's just black magic. Right? We know that it's a fraud. Thou, you, son, art half as happy as we. You're half as happy as we are. We're twice as happy as the sun. And that the world's contracted thus. We're happy because the whole world is contracted. So I've experienced the whole world. Other men could travel the world. I'm going to travel the world of my lover's body. That's one way. Your body is a wonderland, right? Like it's a whole existence, and really the two of their bodies and like that. That's the whole overall metaphor we're dealing with here. Now here is where remember we talked about busy old fool. He's going to cash in on that, right? So now he's going to say, at first he called him a busy old fool. He made arguments that he is actually at the top of the chain, him and his lover in their bed. The world doesn't exist. And now he's going to cash in on all that. Thine age asks ease. And since thy duties be to warm the world, that's done in warming us. So now he's saying, hey, you're old. Remember, we talked about this. You're old. You do what I tell you to do because I'm in charge. That's why I'm able to tell you what to do. I'm at the top of the chain of being because I'm in love. And your age asks ease. You need to take it easy, bro. You're getting old. And since thy duties be to warm the world, well, who is the world? What did we just establish? We established this, son. The world is me and my lover in our bed. That's it. There's nothing else is. So to warm the world, just warm us. So now he went from being pissed off at the sun to saying, okay, so I want you now to warm me and my lover. Shine here to us, and thou art everywhere. This bed thy center is, these walls thy sphere. Now, overall, I think there's even more that you can go into with this poem. So he makes this argument that they are the world, that they are the entirety of the world, which, again, emotionally, I think anybody who's been in love and stayed, up all night or most of the night with their lover, has that notion of what one person I've heard, one interesting writer I've heard put it as carefree timelessness. And this is the feeling that everything else has disappeared. It's the same emotion, or it's the same view if you have teenage kids, or if you remember teenagers, if you know them, if you teach them, or if you deal with them in some way, shape, or form. One interesting things that teenagers have done, I don't know as much today, with phones. I think it's a little bit different, but same principle applies, I think, where back in the day, in my day, a teenager, like one thing you'd experience is that you would hear the teenager, like I would go on the phone with a friend, 6 hours would go by and you come by and your parents ask you, what were you talking about? You're like, I don't know, nothing. Right. And that the reason that is that's carefree timelessness, right? Like you didn't have an agenda. You were just being with one another. I think, by the way, this is an important, as a side note, is a very important part of all good relationships. Is if you want strong relationships, you need some form of carefree timelessness occasionally, even as you get older, where it's just, you don't worry about what time it is. The whole day goes by. You don't even think about it. It's not what's important. What's important is just being with that person. And that, I think, is what he's saying here in a sense. He's saying that is the important element, that he is having this carefree timelessness, and the cares of the world are trying to impinge on him and his lover. And he's saying, nuh-uh, I'm more powerful than you. I can cloud you with a wink, and really a wink with both eyes, but you get the idea. And so you go tell all those other people what to do. That's fine, because they're beneath me and beneath you. And look, hey, you're getting old, so just warm us, and we are the world, and that's all you got to do, and you'll be taken care of. You take care of the whole world, just all the kings and the lands and India and the Americas. They'll all be warmed if you just warm us. It's a hell of a conceit, and it's kind of witty. And he uses far-fetched imagery. That's metaphysical poetry, baby. Okay, so we'll see you next time, and make sure to check out Sunday Morning Poetry, where we're finishing up. We have a couple more poems, including two of the biggest and most complex poems we've expressed gone through so far. Lines Written Above Tintern Abbey by Wordsworth, and of course, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Coleridge. So stay tuned and please share this. It really helps out if you can share this, comment, to ask questions, things like that. Helps spreading the word and gets more people. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.